He's a loner. He's a risk taker who will gamble, but he's not reckless. He likes a drink or two. He's had 2 wives. He had a dreadful childhood because his father was purged from power under Chairman Mao at a very young age, so he lost his father for years. He was beaten and abused by extremists, and then he was exiled to the countryside where he lived in a cave and had to work in the fields. And that was his life through his teens. And finally, he was rehabilitated and allowed to get back into life quite late on. So he missed most of his secondary education. And really, his life only began at the age of 20 or 21 when he was back in Beijing and at university. So he had a horrifically difficult childhood. And this makes for a very hard politician indeed.
Chinese President Xi Jinping is arguably one of the most powerful men in the world, leader of 1.4 billion people and the second largest economy on the planet. But he remains quite an enigmatic figure and a sort of a villain figure in the West, if you like, intent on a type of world domination. So who is he really? What is life like under his China? Well, a new biography of exclusive first-hand accounts pulls back the curtain on the man and his government. It's called The Red Emperor, Xi Jinping and the New China, written by my brilliant guest, a veteran China correspondent who was the Far East correspondent for the Sunday Times for 20 years, Michael Sheridan. Michael, welcome.
Thank you.
You spent a lot of time in China.
A lot of time in China and hours sitting in the Great Hall of the People in Beijing looking at Xi Jinping.
Michael, tell us a little bit about, you and I were discussing this in the break. We don't know that much about him. We know how strong he is, what an iron hold he has over his government and his party, but we don't know much about the man himself.
Well, we do now. The reason I wrote the book was I remember sitting there for the Sunday Times in Beijing and thinking, here's this guy, he controls a nuclear weapons force and the world's second biggest economy, and we know almost nothing about him, including, by the way, most of the journalists. So that's why I decided later on to go back and start digging in and reconstructing, and we do now know a lot more about him. And what we know is not very pretty.
So tell us a little bit about, give us, if you like, a sort of a top line of what we do know about arguably one of the most powerful men on the planet.
He's a loner. He's a risk taker who will gamble, but he's not reckless. He likes a drink or two. He's had 2 wives. He had a dreadful childhood because his father was purged from power under Chairman Mao at a very young age, so he lost his father for years. He was beaten and abused by extremists, and then he was exiled to the countryside where he lived in a cave and had to work in the fields. And that was his life through his teens. And finally, he was rehabilitated and allowed to get back into life quite late on. So he missed most of his secondary education. And really, his life only began at the age of 20 or 21 when he was back in Beijing and at university. So he had a horrifically difficult childhood. And this makes for a very hard politician indeed.
What brought him into politics?
His father. His father was a revolutionary and a leader under Mao. His mother is an extremely powerful personality in his life. She's still alive, by the way. She's in her mid-90s. She's recently done a documentary on Chinese television. She's the strong figure. His father was burnt out and broken by the revolution and war and purges. He died 20 years ago. But his mother remains this strong figure in his life, and it's she who has guided his career at certain points, just at the right time, to put him in the right place.
Michael, we were talking about your book, The Red Emperor, which is already out. It's in the shops. It's available. And you were saying it's the first sort of almost, not, I don't want to say gossipy book, but you include stories that perhaps sit outside what one would think of as a sort of a book about China, which can get quite specialist, if you like. Some might say inaccessible to people who are not already familiar with the politics in China. How difficult was it to put a book like this together? Because I can imagine getting information about someone like Xi Jinping is not going to be easy.
Actually, most of it is there if you know where to look.
Right.
The thing is, it took me by surprise because we kind of all know that the Kremlin is a criminal enterprise and Putin is a gangster and all that, but we sort of thought the Chinese were different. They were straighter, more institutional, they had a structure, they had a party. You know, David Cameron, successive British leaders, proclaimed a golden era of our relations with China. When you dig into it, it's not like that at all. Behind the facade of the party, you have these vicious family mafias struggling for power. When you go through the history and you put it all together, people vanish, people are murdered, there are mysterious deaths, some people disappear and are never seen again until they pop up 5 years later at trial. The man's path to power is littered with casualties. And it's all there. It's just that sometimes specialists can't see the wood for the trees. And I wanted to write something that was popular, accessible, that anyone can read.
So what does he have that others who tried to grasp power hadn't?
Well, first of all, he has lineage. His father was a very powerful figure at the time. There are these family networks in China that operate a power structure at the top. So he had the blessing of these families. They thought they were grooming a manager, and instead they've got a dictator. But the other thing he's got is this extraordinary resilience. This guy has been through so much. He's been up, he's been down, he's been in the fields, he's been under threat, he's been tossed into big political scandals and problems that he's had to overcome, and he has just plodded on and got his way to the top. Don't underestimate him for a second.
Is he a cruel man? And I ask this because one of my sort of lasting memories, it didn't happen that long ago, maybe it's definitely within the last year. There was a big address, the Chinese Communist Party, you know, those big shots, those wide shots that you see of that huge chamber and everybody sitting in a row, and he sat in the middle, and then this rather old, frail man was asked to leave. You remember what the incident I'm talking about. And Xi Jinping didn't even look at this man. He was sat maybe 2 seats away on his left, and this old man seemed to sort of put up a little bit of resistance of why am I being asked to leave. The chamber fell silent. He was marched out of that chamber. And I just thought that, I mean, if ever there was a display of power, this is it.
This man sits at the top of a cruel system. To get there, you have to be cold, you have to be hard, you have to be trained. That's what communists do. That's part of their ideological and political training. They seize opportunities and they exploit weakness. The old man you're referring to was a previous leader who's fallen from power because he retired, actually, but he still had some weight. And then at this last meeting, Xi Jinping basically got rid of all his guys and shuffled him off stage, literally.
I mean, it's quite an extraordinary vision. Michael, what is Xi Jinping's vision of China? Where is he leading the country? And I suppose this is a poignant question for today, because as you and I were discussing in the break, we've just seen a summit from the CIA and the MI6, and the big line coming out is, watch out for China. China is the big danger of the world.
Yes, they talked about Xi Jinping's friend Putin, but then they said that China is the principal intelligence strategic challenge of this century. And they're right about that, because you only have to look at what Xi Jinping himself says. He wants to make China the top power in Asia. He resents years of Western domination. They don't like Western-style democracy or free trade or the economy run on the lines that the Americans have led successfully for many, many years. There's no question that his ambition is to overturn all that and to work towards a new world order. And it's not a world order in which this country would be very, very happy.
Why do you say that?
Well, because there is a personal and historical resentment of the United Kingdom in ruling circles in China. We are blamed for the opium wars of the last century, 19th century, blamed for Hong Kong, blamed for interfering in Chinese affairs, which many powers did over the years. But broadly speaking, this Chinese leader wants to make China a dominant power. And for the first time in 40 years, they're exporting their ideas as well as their goods. They had lots of African leaders in Beijing only last week, and they talk about governance models and ways of administration, learning from the Chinese model. They're not interested in representative democracy or complete free trade or commerce on the lines that they signed up to the World Trade Organization. They want a new order. They see Putin and the Iranians as useful allies in advancing the weakness of Western societies. But ultimately, they want a big, strong, dominant China.
How do you think Xi Jinping views someone like Vladimir Putin?
Well, we know that Xi is quite smooth when he wants to be, and he has shaken hands with his friend Putin and talked of eternal friendship. But we also know that deep down, he really doesn't like Russia. I found a declassified American document from the early 1980s where Xi's mentor, who was then the head of the Chinese defense establishment, told the Americans that Stalin was China's only friend, that the Russians were a historical enemy, they had seized Chinese land 2 centuries ago, and they wanted to make China a poor agrarian supply chain for the socialist bloc. And the Chinese never forgot that. They never forgave the Russians, and they are far more worried and suspicious in Beijing about Moscow than they are about Washington.
Do you think that Vladimir Putin has no choice but to listen to someone like Xi Jinping?
Yes, this is an alliance of porcupines.
Right.
They need each other. The Chinese have a voracious appetite for oil and gas and minerals, which the Russians have in abundance. The Russians now need China for economic support and for their weapons technology. So they're not giving Putin things that go bang, but they are giving him things that go click. It's the electronics, it's the guidance systems, it's the minerals, it's the components that, as the CIA and MI6 said today, are helping the war machine in Russia function. So it's a mutual dependence, but make no mistake, this is not about sentiment or friendship. This is not like an Anglo-American alliance. This is an uneasy alliance.
So what do we do, Michael, going forward? I mean, we have heard the warnings. Plenty of MPs have come forward and said, look, we really need to be careful about China. Not that long ago, I think it was 2 years ago, we were all talking about Huawei and how deeply embedded their systems might be in our telecommunications. But, you know, it's truth to say, last hour we were talking about renewables. I don't think you can pick a solar panel that hasn't been made in China, or a battery. Electric cars now, the majority of them are Chinese-based. We seem to have bought in so much to what China is making. Can we uncouple ourselves from China?
I don't think we should uncouple ourselves from China. We need China. China needs us. The green revolution is not going to happen without Chinese production and technology. But you have to manage this more shrewdly than we have done. So I get worried when I see that David Lammy is going to go to Beijing sometime this autumn and only utter nice words. Nice words don't get you anywhere with someone like Xi Jinping. He's come up through the hardest political system on the planet. As various American officials told me from both the Trump and the Biden administrations, the Chinese respect you if you are strong. If you just go and make nice words, they think you're weak and they'll walk all over you.
So what should David Lammy be saying, in your view?
He should be firm but fair. He should not shrink from talking about the issues which divide us: security, Russia, Ukraine, human rights, Hong Kong, where journalists, among others, are in prison. But he should also give the big, broad issue that there are things on which we need to cooperate with China, the climate being among them. Reciprocal trade is good. It's great that we have Chinese students coming to this country. We'd like to see more British students going to China. There is a way forward, but it has to be very carefully thought out.
Michael, it's absolutely fascinating. The book is fascinating in itself. As you said, it's filled with accessible information, quite a lot of gossip, as you were saying, as well. Things that we haven't heard before about the Red Emperor, Xi Jinping, and the new China. The book is out now. Michael Sheridan, thank you so much for giving us your time. Thank you for coming in. Pleasure to see you.